Welcome to Ordinary Teachers and Students. These bonus episodes, 1, 2, 3, 4 teachers, are concepts or ideas, mostly from psychology, that I feel will benefit teachers. Rather than giving you a 90-minute lecture about them, I thought a bite-sized episode like this would be more suited for busy teachers like you. My name is Alan Cheng, and I'm a life coach and university lecturer. My vision is to make life coaching a part of every school. Today's one concept is long-term memory for exam-taking purposes, which is kind of like medium-term memory, if you see what I mean. The two things to know: one, we are designed to forget. And I mentioned this in case you've forgotten what I said in the last episode. It's all about slowing down forgetting. And so a practice like spaced repetition, which we're going to talk about later, helps us to go down the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve a bit more slowly. The second thing to know is that we need to make the brain work hard for us to remember things. Sometimes we and the students kind of forget this. And so I feel it's important to make students aware of the fact that when their brain is working hard, that's when the true learning happens. The 3 practical implementations. So the first one is interleaved practice. It's common that we teach Unit 1 and then we test Unit 1, we teach Unit 2, and then we test Unit 2. But a more effective way is actually to test more than one topic each time, which is what interleaved practice is. For example, after teaching Unit 1, we might test them Unit 1, but also some previous knowledge they should have learnt, possibly in the previous year. And then after Unit 2, we can test them on Unit 2, but also Unit 1. If we do this throughout the year, students are much more likely to remember the things they learnt earlier in the year when they come to take their final exams. The second practical implementation is active recall, sometimes also known as retrieval practice or practice testing. It's basically just the act of recalling information. And so a simple thing that you can teach students to do is, for example, after a lesson or towards the end of a lesson, ask them to close their textbook and to, on a piece of paper or blank piece of paper, to make some notes of what they learnt without access to the textbook. So this is exactly what we mean by working the brain harder. It's going to be difficult. They won't recall all the things they learned, but it's about creating the awareness that there's a gap in their own knowledge. And of course, you can allow them to see their textbook afterwards and then see those gaps and hopefully bridge those gaps too. Encouraging students to teach one another is also a very, very effective type of active recall, because when we teach something, we realize how much we really do know or don't know. And of course, doing exam papers under exam conditions is an obvious way of getting students to engage in active recall. But when we do exam papers too much, it can get a bit boring. So an even more effective way is actually teaching students how to test themselves. Sometimes we almost assume that students know how to do this, but from my own experience, I don't think students know how to test themselves sometimes. And if you are able to teach them how to use flashcard apps to test themselves on vocabulary or dates to remember, that can be very useful. Or on an even higher level, how to write questions to test themselves. So if you're able to guide them to test themselves and write their own exam papers, that would really help them to understand what they do know and what they don't know. The third practical implementation is spaced repetition and cramming. So spaced repetition is the idea that you repeatedly learn something or test yourself over a longer period of time, as opposed to leaving it last minute. I hope you noticed that I mentioned it was spaced repetition and cramming. It's often, we often speak of these two as almost opposites, and they kind of are. Cramming is simply leaving things until the last minute, right? However, I feel the best and the most optimal way of learning is that if students are well planned enough, if we help them to organize their time better, they should be able to make use of spaced repetition in the weeks or even months leading up to the exam, and then have more intense practice closer to the time of the exam. So have that cramming right in the few days just before the exam. One last point about memory or long-term memory for exam taking is simply that sleep is really very effective for memory consolidation. In fact, that's one of the functions of sleep, to help you to consolidate memories. I once tried to memorize a presentation for my German or French oral exam without knowing that sleep is great for me. I just simply was practicing it just before I went to bed. And the next morning, I was surprised that I had remembered most of that presentation. And yes, so sleep is great. Something else to make students aware of. The 4 takeaways from today's episode would be: 1, students need to be reminded that when they're learning properly, it should challenge their brains. Number 2, when testing students, we should try to mix in different topics. 3, teach students how to test themselves. And finally, 4, have a think about when you taught students effective exam taking techniques specific for your subject. There you go. That's my 1, 2, 3, 4 teachers about long-term memory for exam taking. I hope these will be useful for you as we head into exam season. Hope you join us next time on Ordinary Teachers and Students.